So how do you narrate yourself? And to really, to take the quest that this question requests is to understand what goes into narrating. Because one can't, when one narrates, they ultimately end up with rating themselves. And this is why you cannot say the word or spell the word narrating without ending it with rating. Because when we narrate, we rate ourselves. When we narrate, we rate the world. When we narrate, we rate the people in our worlds. And when we narrate, we rate the character traits and the characters that come together within ourselves. There are stories inside of us. There's a story inside of us. And those stories speak to the gathering of different characters and different values and different ideas that form us. And we rate each one of those. And we rate them through how we narrate them. Through how we sequence them. Through how we value them. So the question again on how do you narrate yourself, ends ultimately with yourself. And how do you rate yourself? And that's the question. Do you narrate yourself? Do you rate yourself? And if so, how? And that is the question, is really, if we look at it from a place of emphasis, I'd like to emphasize how we rate ourselves, because I think that in our world today, we have not found a way to rate ourselves that honors the quantitative and the qualitative, the things that we do and the things that we are, and how those things swing together on a pendulum that is the sum of us, and that summons us. And I would submit that often those rating systems are twisted, are bent out of shape. And that the state of how we narrate ourselves often has to do with the numbers. Typically when we talk about when in a business, when someone asks, how do you rate your experience with this thing or with this product? It's typically a scale of 1 to 10. Or there are kind of 5 levels. It's about levels, it's about numbers, it's about, there's some form of hierarchy that we use to value what it is that we've experienced. And so when we become, in the same way that when we experience products and we rate them in that way, when we become products of our environment, when we become products of systems that don't assist us in the types of characters that we want to be, that put up barriers that we can barely even perceive, much less relieve ourselves from, what we become is unrateable. Unrateable. It's like a movie that is unrated. Typically, movies that are unrated are not watched. They're not seen. And I believe that the stories that we truly need are the stories that are so often unseen in this world. That are so often unperceived in this world because they exist in between this world and the world that we truly desire to occur. So how do you narrate yourself? Well, in a world where much of our experience is unrated and underrated. What I would say is the key to being a good narrator of yourself is to connect with what you've experienced. You see, narrative and chronology are different. So, what chronology is about, when we look at things chronologically, when we look at things from the perspective of a history, it's the attempt to put timestamps on what it is that has been experienced. And there's a value to that. There's a value to that. But it is not all the value. Because when one begins to rate ourselves based solely off of what has been experienced, solely off of the chronology, solely off of what has been seen, for one, they miss the things that are in between, that have not been seen, that have not been heard, that have not been said, that have not been read, that have not been written. And in the midst of that, in the midst of the things that have been forbidden to show themselves, we miss something that is truly telling. And in a world so filled with show and tell, if it cannot be seen, if it cannot be shown, well, how will we really be able to tell anything? To tell the difference between what is valuable and what isn't? Well, so experience is a part of it. But experimentation becomes where the narration occurs. And this is where chronology must step aside for narration. Because see, the difference between chronology and narration is that chronology presents all of the information. It says, here is what we understand, here is what we know so far. This is the story as well as we can order it from first to last. The job of narration is to surpass the organization. And so what narration does is it sequences those sets of events. It sequences those sets in a sense that in terms of time seems like nonsense. Because if we go and watch a movie right now, we will notice that typically movies don't quite start out, they don't quite start where they necessarily began in terms of time. So, the story of Lancelot, this may not, I can't say that all of this will be in reflection to how the stories have been told, but in the story of Lancelot, chronologically speaking, perhaps Lancelot came from the Lady of the Lake and the Lord of the Light. And the Lord of the Light was walking one day with his army and got lost and stumbled into a lake where the lady laid. And as the lady lays there on top of the lake, the Lord of the Light is taken away. Breath is taken away. And he takes 1 day, which becomes 2 days, which becomes 3 days, which becomes 4 days. And before they even knew it, a new life came through this conversation. This intimacy between the Lady of the Lake and the Lord of the Light, until a baby was born. And that baby held in the Lady of the Lake's arms, charmed with both light and fluidity. What was bright and what ebbs and flows would grow to become Lancelot. And that is some form of chronology. That is some from what happens in the beginning to what happens in the end. There are some things that are often skipped that happens, right, that are unsaid. And if that is as good as chronology as we can get from beginning to end, what must happen then is that chronology must step aside. And what narration then does is provide a way of experimenting with that experience so that we may be exposed potentially to something there that we couldn't have seen before. And so narration provides a coordination for these events, provides a coordination for how these different energies of moments and experiences can vent themselves out into the realm, out into our eyes, and out onto that screen that you have seen when you see this story, when you hear it. And it is here that it becomes really important that we recognize that the experimentation is where narration occurs. That value shows up in what happens as things and circumstances change. That the value shows up in what happens when the page turns, when things get turned upside down, when things get turned around. You know that things work when they can happen in reverse. So, when what happens in our stories go awry, or when what happens in our stories get better. Perhaps reverse is going back to a far better, something that was far more ancient and potent. And that's what it's about. And in the process, in the route of that return, and the route when things turn again, for better, for worse, for up, for down, for left, for right, wrong, whatever happens along the way. In that in-between, that's where we can rate things. That's where the rating can occur. Because what narrating does is it steps into those kinds of moments, and it shows us, it gives us it gives us the stakes. It shows us how important those things that we can't quite bring to the immediate expression. It shows us the importance of the progression of those things. And why staying in the story matters. Because those are the points in the story where we don't know what's going to happen. Isn't that why we see movies? There's often movies and TV shows and things like that and stories. There are some stories where we can sense how it's going to end. We have a general sense, particularly if it's a series and we know it's a series. There's a general sense that, okay, the main character will survive. Or if it's a series where we know that the character dies. We know that the character is going to die. But so then why do we see the story? Well, is it really about the end? No, it's about how it all happens. Right? It's about that in between. It's about the unseen. And it's about what happens in the dark spaces. like the one that we're somewhat in right now. And if somehow we can allow those darker moments to happen, if we can allow those unknowns to be where curiosity is grown, experimentation, narration will play its role, and you will find things out about yourself that no one else could tell you. And your movie may not make it on the screen. Your movie may not be seen by millions. But it'll be seen by you. It'll be seen by those who are most valuable to you, who are able to value you, thus making them valuable. That is how you narrate yourself.